Music for me has always been play, and I've always managed to keep it in that space. I guess my biggest advice that I would give would really be to play, to enjoy the music rather than to turn it into a chore, because that's the fastest way for you to procrastinate something. So when I'm writing a song, when I'm producing, I don't have a goal. I'm not looking this song needs to be finished, right? I don't know when it finishes.
In this episode of the Wayfaring Stranger podcast, I talked to my friend Daniel Lim. Daniel is a prolific creator and somebody who I often go to talk me out of my perfectionistic tendencies. While at different times I struggle to produce an EP's worth of music per year, Daniel, on the other hand, had backlogged almost an album's worth of content last year and just hadn't released it yet. In this conversation, we talk about Daniel's mindset in creativity and how that helps him avoid the familiar pitfalls of procrastination and perfectionism. Honestly, this conversation showed me a lot about Daniel I didn't previously know, and yet at the same time, it was also like a therapy session for me to get out of my creative ruts. I hope you enjoy and benefit from it as much as I did.
I think at the heart of it, I've always been a creative. I
Hmm.
used to do other mediums of creating.
Like
Used
what?
to, well, yeah, I used to be. I know this is funny. It's like ancient history. I used to mime.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, and then I did a little bit of playwriting and yeah, I mean a bit of acting as well. But yeah, and then music came along, and I sort of just adopted that as a medium. But being a creative at heart, I could not just reproduce what has already been created. Whether it's
Mm,
worship music, whether it's classical music, whether it's you know covers of secular songs.
right.
I felt like the need to create something from scratch. You know, very quickly from when I learned my first few chords, I wrote my first song.
Wow.
And again, it wasn't. It's not like the best song. I just started because I guess I had that drive as a creative. I had that need, that itch to create.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why did you feel the need to make something original? Because, in all honesty, I started doing covers for a while before I don't think I wrote my first song. I'd been playing music since I was 9 when I got my guitar. I don't think I wrote my first full song till I was 25. After
Right.
Moody, like way after
Yeah.
we knew each other.
Right. Right.
Like, what was your reason for making a song? Just because what was in your head needed to come out?
Well, I think everybody does what they do, especially in the creative realm, whether it's music, dance, whatever. They do it for different reasons. Their why, so to speak, is very different from one person to the next. My why, I guess, is what drove me. And that's a difficult thing to talk about because it's difficult to articulate
Mm-hmm.
what drives a person to do anything, right?
Yeah.
But I would say my motivation was very intrinsic. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So I guess creating for me has always been a way for me to process difficult things in life, process good things in life, and process theological truths that may not necessarily be immediately true in my everyday life, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So I guess my drive was really just to process. I wrote my first song like maybe a few months after I started playing the guitar, but I did not necessarily share it.
I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what's an example of a theological truth that you're working out in a song?
I think a big one right now for me is, I guess, the tension between just being a believer, a follower of Christ, rather than doing
Mm.
it. It's because I tend to find my value in the doing rather than the being. And I have known in my head that to sit at the feet of Christ is really all that's necessary, and I struggle to do that, especially since like my occupation, my ministry with Operation Mobilization requires me to be first and foremost rather than to do, and I
Mm.
find the doing so much easier. So much easier
Yeah.
to also quantify and find a metric in terms of quality. But to be, you can't really quantify and find a metric on, so I tend to end up doing. So I know I need to be, but I struggle to do that. So, I've been writing. I've been writing about that.
Mm. So you're saying kind of being is more just reminding yourself of your identity, and doing is a way to justify your, I don't know, existence or your
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah. On the negative side of the doing, I mean,
Right.
obviously, when we talk about James, the doing should be a fruit of the
Right.
being, right?
Of course.
But if I were to be completely honest, that's not entirely the case right now. It's yeah.
Does the creative gene kind of run in your family? Are your parents, do they have that need also to create?
Yeah, they dabble, but they don't really create. Not even my sister. I mean, she creates in a sense that she's involved with like a cover band. I'm not sure if she writes her own music. She hasn't shared them necessarily. Maybe I should ask her actually. I'm not sure why they're not particularly music isn't as big a part of their life as it is for me. My
Right.
sister, like she's very much involved in music still, so I would say she's closer. But yeah, I do not think it's necessarily a genetic thing.
What was it like growing up in Singapore? You were there until you came over here for college?
Yeah, yeah. 2013 is when I came over, but even before that, I was serving for 2 years on board the Lagos Hope on board the ship. But before that, yes, I was in Singapore my whole life. Singapore is a tough place to be a creative. They don't really accept creatives. So the school is usually catered to the more left brain type of
Yeah.
individuals. So to be entirely honest, I struggled. I struggled quite a bit
Mm,
growing up in Singapore.
yeah, a lot of STEM stuff, engineering,
Hmm.
math,
Yep.
etc. Probably medical.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the culture like? Like, how's it? Was it a culture shock coming over here?
It was a culture shock coming over and living with a bunch of freshmen. Yes, that was
Yeah.
difficult. But I would say the American culture as a whole, I mean, it's a culture that has individualism as an ideal. So, that was not difficult for me to embrace because, I felt like I could sort of be myself without breaking social norms.
Mm.
So I would say that was a breath of fresh air.
What's the church like over in Singapore? Is it difficult to be a Christian?
There's no persecution, if that's what you're asking.
Mm.
Singapore is an atheistic state which celebrates the right for individuals to have their own religion. So it's a little different from here because here I think Christianity has a very strong history in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much Singapore. Christianity was just one of the several religions that are represented in our culture.
What's the most common over there?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I don't think there is a most common. You have
Mm.
atheists, you have a lot of Christians, you have a lot of Muslims, and a lot of Buddhists, and Taoism is big too.
Mm.
So, and yeah, and Hinduism as well. So there isn't a predominant uh, religion. Yeah.
Were you raised in the church?
Yes, I was raised in the church. My parents, I am second generation Christian.
Mm.
Yeah.
And how did your parents come to faith?
My father came to faith through, if I'm not wrong, a teacher. One of his
Mm.
teachers was a Christian. So my parents met on the mission field on board like the Lagos, the original Lagos, with Operation Mobilization.
Mm.
And so they are very firm believers, very strong Christians. In fact, they're back on the ship doing ministry
Oh,
again.
wow.
So my entire family, three-quarters, are currently missionaries.
Wow.
Yeah, so a bit of a legacy there.
Were they pretty encouraging when you started writing music and spending a lot of time producing your own stuff?
Yes and no. I would say they were definitely a lot more encouraging than other parents would have been
Mm.
in my culture. But to be fair, I spent a lot of time on music. I think there was like a few years where I would spend at least a couple of hours every single day writing and playing guitar. I should be a lot better than I actually am. Considering the amount of time I spent on music. I would say for like typical Asian parents, that's a difficult thing to watch your kids do. They were very free with how I spent my time. So I ended up spending a lot of time on music. But of course, like they had to like push me back to my schoolwork.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Mhm.
as a whole, yes, I would say they were encouraging to my music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old were you when you started spending 2 hours a day on music?
I'd say like maybe 14.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not normal. I mean, at least not in this culture. Not anyone I know spending that much time doing something at that age.
Really?
I mean, unless it was like obviously sports, because that's externally enforced. Like you have a team, you have a coach, etc. But I mean, I spent a lot of time doing stuff, but I wouldn't say every day. You know what I mean? It
Right.
was like I loved making films when I was growing up, and I probably spent hundreds of hours doing that, but it wasn't like disciplined. Like every day I would do it. You know what I mean?
Right. It wasn't discipline for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I am not a disciplined person. If I had discipline, I would have spent a lot less time on music, a lot more
Mm,
time doing my schoolwork. So music for me was more akin to computer games.
I
You
see.
know,
So that was your
yeah,
outlet. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, so you get a lot. I'm sure you get a lot of people like in America who would spend hours every day playing Call of Duty or something. I don't know. I'm not a gamer, but
Oh yeah.
yeah. So that was my version of gaming.
No joke. There was a guy at Moody on my floor who like 12 to 14 hours a day. I don't. It's
Wow.
insane. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
So yeah, that would be me if my parents did not rein me in.
mm.
But it would have been the music.
Interesting. So, what were you doing for those 2 hours? Were you practicing? Because there's a lot of things to focus on, right? There's
Hmm.
the songwriting itself, there's your skills as a musician singing and playing, and then there's like the technical aspect of mixing. There's then
Yeah.
production, which is a little more big picture.
Well, the instrument came first. That's what started me in music, and then I just had a natural desire to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make it clear, I wasn't particularly talented at the
Mm,
guitar. I was sort of like normal.
mm-hmm.
Um, the difference was again the amount of time I spent on it.
Mm,
uh, so here's the deal. Like when it comes to creating, like my philosophy in creativity, because part of my job as an artist mentor is I work with people in developing themselves as artists. And I always tell them that if you just imagine a Venn diagram, I've never drawn the Venn diagram because it's so simple to just say it. Imagine two circles, and obviously the two circles, like any Venn diagram, will intersect. On one circle, it is what you are able to do, and in the other circle is what you like. And the intersection is what you actually create, right? That's
mm,
your art. What you like intersect with what you're able to do. The thing is, I've spent like zero time on what I'm able on like the what I'm able to do circle, and spent all my time on what I like. And of course, they're not mutually exclusive. So all of my time was just spent on me creating music, whether it's writing a song, playing the song over and over and over again, like trying a new song, trying it a different way. When I got my interface and my mic, it's creating the song. I spent no time researching, learning how to do something. That is not how I would advise people to spend their time in creating. However, 90% of the people that I work with, they are very skilled in the what they're able to do section,
mm.
right? But when they write something, the biggest complaint is usually, man, when I write a song, it sounds so cheesy, right? And when I hear that as like someone who's coming in to give my input, I'm like, well, okay, like usually when I first started, I was like, that's not helpful. Like, what do you mean by cheesy? Like if you get out of the space of what you think is cheesy, it might still be cheesy to me as an individual.
Right.
And I realize it's because they spent very little time on that other circle of the Venn diagram, what they like. They have not developed a strong sense of what they like. And I would say your identity as an artist is very firmly cultivated with that bubble of the Venn diagram. with what you like. If you do not have a firm understanding of your tastes and your preferences, of your own inclinations, then things that you write will be cheesy because you're writing stuff that you don't like,
Mm.
and you can't articulate it because you have not developed your sense and sensibilities yet, right? Your sense of taste. So for me, I spend all my time, right, like doing stuff that I like. Oh, here's something I like, and I'll try it out. As a natural result, I developed what I'm able to do, but I developed what I'm able to do in a very niche and very particular way, if that makes sense.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all had that experience, I'm sure, of creating something and being like, well, this is not as good as the stuff I listen to.
Hmm.
Um, but Ira Glass, who's a radio producer for NPR, he created This American Life. He said, that's the beginning stage where you're at the place where you have good taste, but your abilities have not matched your taste, you
Hmm.
know? So he's like, you have to keep developing your taste and your taste gets better over time. But it's good that you can tell that your stuff is not to the level of the stuff you're listening to.
Yeah.
But it's a frustrating part of like, if you're an acrobatic or something like that, it's like, oh, I want to be able to do that move. It might take years before you can do a certain move, but the fact that you're aiming towards it takes time. There's so many foundational skills before you can do certain twists and
Hmm.
flips in the air, right?
Yeah. So I think the way when because I saw that video and it was very formative for me too,
Mm,
in my journey as an artist.
yeah.
I think what he was because I definitely recognized that gap when I was at Moody. Man, that gap was huge, right, for me.
Really?
But
I
I
love the
think.
stuff you're making in Moody.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Still
Well,
one of
to
my
be
favorite songs. I Am Lost. I love that song.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
remember you telling me that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think for what Ira Glass was talking about, he has a presupposition that you already have to a certain degree quite a developed taste,
Mm,
if that
mm-hmm.
makes sense, right? Just to be honest, and I say that a lot, which is needless. I should just be honest in my very first my very first word.
Yeah, to be frank, I guess
Yeah,
is
to
what
be
you're.
frank, I guess, like to be frank and to be brutally honest, so to speak. Like when you approach like Christian music, for example, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an. I know when I always try to clarify. I don't have an issue with CCM. Like a big part of my identity is as a worship leader, and a lot of the songs that I do on Saturday or Sunday morning is CCM. Personally, I don't like CCM. I just don't. It doesn't tickle my fancy, so to speak.
Mm,
I
mm-hmm.
used to feel so guilty about that. Like what's wrong with me? Am I even a Christian
Mm.
for not liking Phil Wickham? I just don't.
Because you didn't like listening to it.
No, I just don't like listening to it. And the newer the stuff gets, I don't know whether it's because I'm getting old. I would say it's because I have a very distinct taste. I just like what I like. I can't help it, you know. Or maybe I could have helped it if I just chose to not develop my taste. But
Yeah.
then I feel that then I would not have played my part in the kingdom of God as an artist if I
Mm.
didn't develop my taste. And I think people like the world loses out when people don't develop their so here's my point. Like I feel that the CCM world has created a ground that is not fertile for Christian creatives to be authentically themselves. I just don't.
I
And the
see. Yeah.
proof of that to me is very obvious. If everybody was authentically themselves in creating, then why does CCM all sound the same,
Mm.
right? If you have
Mm-hmm.
every tribe, every tongue, and every individual, like being who God created them to be, then wouldn't CCM, and if CCM was or like the genre that is Christian music,
Right.
truly celebrated creativity as one of God's many facets of identity, and we as His image bearers being creatives, and each of us being created in His image in our own individual facet, because I believe that, right? And I think we all do.
Mm-hmm.
If we truly believe that, then wouldn't our genre as a religion be so much more diverse than it is?
Right.
But it's not. It's not. And then when I get into rooms with Christian writers, and I just went to a conference where everyone was writing, and they all sound the same. It's the same,
Mm-hmm.
not just the same progressions, same lyrical cadence,
Mm-hmm.
same lyrical vocabulary as
Oh
well,
yeah,
right?
totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
something
100% the
about
same.
water.
That's right.
Always.
If you step away from a certain sensibility, suddenly it's no longer Christian. That's a to me that's a problem, right?
Sure.
And to me, the biggest problem is that it's not a fertile ground that allows and encourages creatives to actually be authentically creative themselves.
Well, the thing, and I was just talking to you. Remember Tom, who we made the film with? You helped on the sound for that short film as my
Yes, yes,
capstone.
yes.
So
Yeah.
Tom was the lead actor, and I actually just released the podcast with him last week. So we had a good conversation about this. But basically, I was like, it's frustrating to me because I'm still into film, although most of my time right now is spent making music and doing this podcast. But that's still a passion of mine. That's still something I want to pursue. But my point to him was it's frustrating to me that I can just look at a trailer or look at an image like a still from a film and I can tell it's a Christian film
Yeah.
because it's not about budget per se. There's a lot of low budget movies that I could not tell just by looking at the still frame of it. But particularly with Christian film, the two biggest issues are lighting, color, and then the costumes. Like especially when they do period pieces, it looks like these things were just made, like they weren't worn, they've never been used before. But yeah, it's just like these kind of trade craft things that I'm like, why is that missing? You know? And when I look at Christian music, or you can call it, yeah, CCM, because there are Christians who make music that I think is quite ornate and
Yeah,
I think a lot of
absolutely.
people would be able. I think you and I could both, think of like Josh Garrels, for instance, of like,
Hmm.
I think he was one of the first people that I found who was like, okay, this is the first person I could actually relate to what they were writing to and appreciate like the music they were making.
Hmm.
And there's some others, but yeah, I think it's like, why are we using only this many colors to paint this painting? You know what I mean? We chose that these are the colors, this washed out electric guitar, a U2 style delay. And, yeah, I feel like it's kind of been dominated by a melancholy minor key type thing. Like, not to get too nerdy, but like an E minor, C, G, D type chord progression.
Yeah, I don't I just like I always say I'm not against CCM. I don't think it's like bad or anything. And to be honest, like there are times where I do actually really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just telling someone, if I get into a cynical mood, especially when I'm watching like a YouTube video trying to learn a song because I gotta play it on a Sunday or something, all I gotta do is I just gotta go to the comment section and you see like, wow, okay, like this is really reaching people. So there's definitely a place for it. So it's not so much like the genre itself that I think is necessarily bad. However, I feel that like every genre has its genre identification markers, right? Every
Hmm.
cultural genre too. I remember I was working with someone from Benin, like this ethnomusicologist, and we were working on a song together. And so he was sort of co-producing it with me, and he was teaching me about African music. And he was like, a genre identification marker is repetitiveness for African music. That's what he said, right?
Mm.
And also, there's not a lot of dynamics. It just comes in big and it stays, that
Hmm.
way, which is not what I normally do, right? But everything has boundaries. If you stray from it and then it ceases to be that genre, right?
Hmm.
But with CCM or Christian music, and just take a step back and say Christian music in general, I feel that the boundaries that have been created, because there needs to be boundaries for it to be considered, sacred music, I guess,
Hmm.
but I don't think a lot of thought has been put into what those boundaries are. And so the existing boundaries that we are left with are arbitrary. like talking about water doesn't make it Christian, you know?
Mm,
Or like
mm-hmm.
that using the big sky reverb pedal doesn't make it automatically Christian. That's not a genre identification marker,
Mm-hmm.
but it has become a genre identification marker, you
Mm-hmm.
know? I don't know whether like you've been targeted for this on Facebook, but I get ads about like want to learn how to play worship guitar. This is a
Mm.
course on how to, and then they'll have like snippets of the course and they talk about like look at my pedals, you know. This is the sound you want to get. This lush sound in order for it to have a worshipful atmosphere. I'm like, these are not identification markers. These are not boundaries that I think are helpful.
Right. That's funny because I feel like that's kind of dated by this point. I mean, I feel like it started becoming prominent with Hillsong in like 2005,
Yeah,
6, that era. I'm like, dude,
still
it's
going.
20 years later. Like, have we not
Yeah,
thought of anything else yet?
yeah, still going, man.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think maybe you get targeted more for that because your job is a little bit more integrated into that. I
Yeah,
do help lead music at my church sometimes, but on a much smaller scale. It's normally just me with an acoustic guitar.
yeah.
But what is like some music that you look up to as being sacred yet inspiring?
I've always been a huge fan of the Oh Hellos.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're absolutely incredible, you know. To be honest, like I've been going through not necessarily metamorphosis, but you know, like a big part of music is community, right?
Mhm.
And so I've been a part of communities. I've started becoming a part of communities that has spoken into the way I write music. Two of which, you know, are communities that I've sort of like spearheaded, started, so to speak, you know, and obviously I don't want to claim too much credit for these communities because they're made out of incredible people that make communities possible, right? But they're like co-writing groups. So they are communities that are there to create a culture of collaboration and creativity. So one of
Mhm.
them is like a global co-write group, right? Where you people from everywhere, from Belgium all the way to Nepal, all the way to like Armenia, and you know just everywhere. And then I have a local community here where we it's also a co-writing group for people in my church at Chapel Street. And a lot of the experiences there and the songs that are being written have been very informative about what I've started to find beautiful.
Mm.
So they're not necessarily people, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, and this is weird, like I'm a part of like a sync licensing group. It's an online group. And I've started working with people in that group, like collaborating and writing with them. And it's not a Christian group. It's a group that writes specifically for film. And a lot of the music there has started to inform my music. And they're not writing sacred music,
Mm.
but so many of them are Christians. You know, a
Mhm.
lot of them are Christians.
Yeah.
And I would say it's not necessarily the content, but the process in which has started to really inspire and inform me as a musician, even on a philosophical level,
Mhm.
to be honest.
What's the music licensing group that you're a part of?
They are called To Indie, but they've recently changed their name to Sync Society.
Mm.
Sync as in SYNC.
And you upload your own originals to there?
Yeah, so the format that they do is that every month they have an agency that will come in and give a brief, right? And tell us like, oh, we are working with projects that are looking for music that sound like XYZ, and then they talk about it.
Oh, okay.
And then I would either look at my current catalog, which is what I've been doing, you know, just looking at my current catalog and submitting music, and then they pick the best, and then they submit it as a sample for the agencies to listen to, and then you can get your songs signed that way.
That brings up another question. How have you made music financially viable? Because you've been doing this for how well, when you were in Moody, you were producing a lot of music, but obviously you didn't have maybe the same financial pressures you do now because you have a
Yeah.
family and you have kids and everything like that. But how have you made this work for you?
Right. Firstly, I am super blessed. I'm just it's by the grace of God that I'm in the position that I'm in. And and things may change, but God is still good. I just wanna I just want to say that, so it's not by my own doing that I'm able to do what I do.
Yeah.
My biggest source of income is as a missionary through OM as an artist mentor
Mm-hmm.
uh, through OM. So in that regard, I'm like I rely on supporters, right? Whether it's through a couple of churches and a whole ton of individuals that support me
Mm.
individually, but the rest of my income they come from, frankly, so many different sources. It's kind of hard for me to keep track of them all, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm. You must
Whether
have
it's
fun doing
through,
taxes.
oh my goodness, it's a nightmare.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, my H&R Block person is, like has a bit of a job. Like last semester, I was teaching at Moody for a
Mm.
semester.
Oh, really?
So
I didn't know that.
yeah, so I had some income there, and then I have income from freelance work, whether I am scoring music for a video that comes every now and then, whether I am producing a demo for a songwriter, whether I'm doing mix, audio engineering work. When I started my job at Moody, I stopped because of cancer and they replaced me, so they don't need me anymore. But I dropped a lot of my freelance work, which
Mm.
I am honestly okay with.
Yeah, it's probably
um,
stressful. A lot to
yeah,
manage.
it's a little stressful because you have to exercise your creative mind to do that, and then when you step out to do your own creative things, you're kind of fatigued already.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit of a challenge. I lead worship, as well, so that's another source of income.
Mm-hmm.
I Patreon, small source of income that mainly just drops and goes into the music making world.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Streaming from Spotify, stuff like that. So from everywhere, it's hard to keep track of.
Yeah. Wow, that is a lot.
Yeah.
I didn't think about all the different sources, and then also the sync licensing thing that you're mentioning.
Yeah, so I have I mean, I have some micro placements. I got turned to sync licensing because when I released my old stuff meaning the stuff that you heard when I was making a Moody, I was releasing it through CD Baby. And
Mm-hmm.
CD Baby had Pro Publishing, which was essentially uh, their version of sync licensing. It's just this
Mm-hmm.
massive library that people can sift through and use music for cheap. And I was getting a little bit of income there. At one point, I was getting like $50 every 3 months. And I was like, what is this? I've never seen this before. This is when I discovered sync licensing about a year ago. And I started to try to actually put effort into it. But for various reasons, one reason is that my music isn't inherently very syncable because my music is slower, more thoughtful,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't very sync licensing syncable, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's still a place for it. So I've been signed to a lot of labels, a lot
Okay.
of agencies, I should say, but I haven't gotten placements from them yet. You know,
Mm.
which
Mm-hmm.
is very normal in this world. Like people wait and wait for a
Oh
long
yeah.
time. So I'm not gonna claim that I have any income worth mentioning from that avenue.
Mm.
Yeah.
So going back to your kind of prolific level of output, that's always something I've admired about you. I've told you that many times. How do you keep going with that? Is that a choice? Is it just something you've done for so long that it's just a habit? Like, how have you been able to put out so much music?
Right. Well, firstly, thank you. Like I said, like going back to my days learning guitar and writing songs for the first time when I was 14 all the way to maybe 18, 19, 20, spending 3, 4 hours every day doing it. It was like gaming for me. It was not a matter of discipline. And I'll say this. I'm not saying that I don't have talent, but I definitely have less talent than I think people give me credit for. But what I do have is just a desire to create, right? And I think creating from a desire is so much more effective in developing yourself as an artist than, frankly, discipline. Don't quote me on this. Well, I guess quote me on this, but do your own research and find a study. But I remember hearing somewhere that it takes like X number of hours for you to learn how to do something if you are disciplined in doing it. But it's like a third or like this a much smaller number of hours if you were learning to do the same skill but through play,
Mm.
right? So music for me has always been play, and I've always managed to keep it in that space. Now, there are a lot of times where I have to step out from that, and I'll be like, I don't feel like doing it, but I still got to do it. I got to do
Right.
it, just And so yes, there is 100% discipline involved, but very much akin to say someone who is gaming as a profession, right? Whether
Mm,
they're like streaming it for people to watch, whatever, right? Some level of discipline is required, even in that
sure.
in that realm. But I would say like I guess my biggest advice that I would give, which may or may not work from person to person, would really be to play, to enjoy the music rather than to turn it into a chore, because that's the fastest way for you to procrastinate something, you know.
Yeah. I've kind of learned that the hard way. I think the thing that a lot of people, especially those who are successful, I actually think they have a harder time keeping it like play, because I think once you actually are successful at something and people really react strongly to it in a positive way,
Hmm.
you're tempted to keep hitting that again and again and striking,
Yeah.
try to bleed it dry because it worked for you last time.
Yeah.
But the artists that I've always been fascinated by, like for instance, Beck, just his discography, like from the beginning to now, like he's done everything from like, I don't even know what to call his first album, like rap, rock, something. And then it gets to like this really sad pop, and then he gets into kind of retro rock, and then he goes
Hmm.
folk pop. Like he's always changing, and I think that's what kept it. Like for me, that's kind of been how I keep it interesting, is I don't try to stay in a genre. My first release ever was instrumental music. And so people are like, "Oh, you do instrumental music." I'm like, "Well, I did. And now I'm going to do this."
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, so now you're kind of like pop rock." I'm like, "Well, I'm doing folk now." It's like, "Oh,
That's right.
now
Yeah.
you're folk." And then so I think for me personally, I have fun not trying to nail down a genre. Some people really, all their music fits in a genre, and that's okay. But for me, that's how I keep it fun. So what
Yeah.
are some ways that you have been able to keep music fun for you?
Yeah, and I think what you've just described is a big part of it. And what you're doing as well, like you switching from cinematic to your folk and or folk rock, I should say, like
Mm-hmm.
genre. It wasn't done out of like a conscious decision. It wasn't like, or I should say, a strategic decision. It wasn't like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, now it's time for me to do folk because that's where the market is or whatever.
Right.
It was instinctive. You did it because you wanted to, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the way to go. That is really important. Like it's the same for Beck, I'm sure. Like, and you hear his music, you're like, okay, that's different, that's unique, and maybe some people who don't like him, they'll say, okay, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
But even that is better than, okay, yeah, that's normal. Like
Yeah.
that's expected. That's a better thing to say. Like that's weird than that's expected.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm not trying to stray out of a genre, not deliberately. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'm just doing what I like, what I enjoy, which is a part of honing my taste and my sense. I'm always like honing my taste, and it's always changing. I would say that I don't know. This might be more a tangent or like a parallel point to maybe answering the question that you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like a lot of artists struggle because they focus so much on the product rather than the process. Or maybe I should re-articulate it different. They have a different idea what the product is, right? They think that the song is the product or the album is the product. The music's the product. That is not the product. The product that you should be focusing on is yourself, right?
Mm.
As an artist. And when you start to realize that you are the product, and by the way, this is also really important when you're releasing music, right? People are not in it for the music; they're in it for the artist, for the story
Mm.
behind the music, right?
Right.
And so that's why you get a lot of people when people do social media well. That's what they do. I do not do social media well because I don't like the platform of social media, and I
Mm.
don't really want to tell my story there.
Yeah.
the heart behind it is right. Like you are the product, and how what that looks like in the other product, which is the music or what people think is the product, that would naturally change and take form in a more organic manner than if you treat the music as the product. I don't know if I'm making sense or not. You know?
Mm, I
uh,
see what you're saying.
yeah.
Well, it's where the product comes from in a sense. I think there's two ways of going about it though, because I think there's also a lot of musicians who I don't really know anything about them.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know anything about Beck apart from the fact that he's a Scientologist and
Hmm.
he grew up in LA. But,
Hmm.
I feel like I get to know him actually through his music because I'll even say this like an actor, right? Actors who are really good at basically becoming another person. I think there's different types of actors. I think there's the actors who kind of always play the same part and they're always maybe that's who they are or maybe that's just an exaggerated version of who they are. I'm thinking more like Tom Cruise. I wouldn't say on a whole he can transform, of course, because he's an
Right.
actor, but a lot of his roles have very similar emotional
Yes.
range to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even another really good actor like Denzel Washington, a lot of his roles fall within a certain range
Yeah.
of expression. Then you have somebody, of course, the typical example is Daniel Day-Lewis, who completely morphs for each role.
Mm.
And you can't even tell it's him sometimes. So
Yeah.
I think musicians have a similar ground to play with. I think you can be the Tom Cruise type musician just in the sense that you have a certain range that you normally find yourself in. And then you could be
Hmm.
somebody else who just completely transforms their sound. Another good example would be like Radiohead. Like everyone knows the song Creep, but you know, then you have Kid A, their completely electronic album. Everyone's like, what the heck is this? Like, this isn't why we signed up for you guys. This isn't why we bought your albums, you know?
Yeah.
And it angered people
Yeah.
because they chose to become so electronic.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that when I say that the product is the musician, I'm saying it's if okay, for example, when I write a song or when someone writes a song and then they're so debilitated with the way the song sounds because it's not up to their standard or whatever the standard is,
Mm,
and then they don't release it or they don't even finish it. They just
yeah,
sit in it, right? But
yeah.
if you were to approach music as as a byproduct of yourself, right?
Hmm.
Then you're not so like you're not holding on to that song as much because guess what? Like that song has developed you as a musician. It
Right.
has taught you something about what you like. It has taught you something about music in general. You have improved as a person. You are the product. That's what I'm trying to say. And then you can step out to the next project with a little more confidence.
I think I get what you're saying a little bit more. I've
Yeah, yeah,
taken up running recently, and I've no joke. This is something that you can actually get so into the metrics of running that I've done this right because at certain times I want to run within a certain heart rate, because it's better. You're not going to build up lactic acid if you're below an
yeah.
aerobic, heart rate
Hmm.
below 150 for me based on my age. But you can get to the place where you're like, oh, I'm already above the heart rate I want to be at. I'm stopping running. Or you could just press through, right? And eventually, if you run enough, your heart rate is going to lower naturally over time. I think that's kind of what you're saying is like, and I forget who said this. I mean, a lot of people have said this, but you learn so much more from finishing an imperfect song than you do by not finishing a perfect song.
Yeah.
Like you're halfway done with the best song versus finishing the bad song. You actually learn more from finishing the bad song.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that statement. I mean, one thing I was like teaching some of my students in Moody was that I was talking about this experiment that some potter made. I don't know, I saw it on a reel, so I don't know if it's true. But I mean, the heart behind it, I think, is really true. But basically, he was saying like this guy, and he said to say 100 students, 50 of you for the next 3 months, they're all new at making pottery. And the first 50, he said, your job for the next 3 months is to make the best cup you could possibly make. And he said to the other 50, your job for the next 3 months is to make as many cups as you can. And they don't have to be good. As long as it's a cup, then that you made it, right? And at the end, they said, okay, both of you, bring me your best cup. And the group that was just making crappy cups, their cups were amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, to me, it's the same concept, phrased in a different way, right? Because like the people who were just making cups, they were doing the work that made them better potters,
Mm-hmm.
and better potters make better cups,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's the same, to me. It's the same for music, but it doesn't just look like the quantity, right? It also looks like what you create, like the type of music you create.
Sure. Doing it with intention.
If you don't see yourself as the product, and you see your music as a product, and the product you're trying to create is Christian music, then what you're gonna do is you're gonna sit down, you're gonna play E minus C G D over and over again, and you're
Mm-hmm.
never gonna stray from that, because that's what Christian music is in your
Right.
mind,
Right.
right? But if you see yourself as a product and be like, oh my goodness, you know what? I want to understand tritone substitutions, right?
Mm.
When are you ever gonna use that in CCM? But you want to do it because you just have a natural interest, and you started to treat yourself as the product, right? You're like, oh my gosh, like I'm improving as a musician because now I understand what and how to use tritone substitution. And then maybe like I started using it in Christmas music, for example, right? Like,
Mm.
oh no, this is a cool way to use it. But it's so far out of the genre identification of Christian music. And if I had decided to look at my music as the product and to do what people have said, hey, I like that about your music, then I would never have learned tritone substitution, and I would never have applied it to a song. I don't know if that makes a little more sense.
Yeah, well, you're just talking about the joy of kind of experimenting and adventuring in a bit.
Yeah.
It's like I think my struggle, and you've tried to help me as a therapist and coach me through that, but I'm always wrestling with my perfectionistic tendencies.
Mm.
And I've learned slowly, I'm not there yet. I'm definitely not as far along as you are in understanding that, but I have learned to enjoy exploring more. And I wanted to ask you, do you deal with those? I know you don't deal with them in the same way I do, but do you deal with perfectionistic tendencies? And how do you find a balance with finishing something while also maintaining a standard of quality?
Right. Standard of quality, that's what does that mean, right? That's a difficult thing to articulate. And at the end of the day, especially if you're talking about developing artists, the artist himself or herself is the one that decides what that standard of quality is, right?
Sure.
I will admit that I do have a standard. It's not that I don't have a standard and I just do whatever I want. Like there are things that I think sound better.
Mm-hmm.
There are things of my stuff that I like, and things of my stuff that I just like, oh my gosh, yeah, I do not like that.
Mm.
But I do hold that standard with a more open hand, both as it relates to other people and as it relates, more importantly, I guess, for a discussion, as it relates to myself, right?
Mm.
I hold it with an open hand for other people to be kind, right?
Mm.
You don't want to listen to a song and say it doesn't sound like Matchbox 20, you suck,
Yeah. That would
so
probably
you
make it
don't.
better, actually.
Hey, I like Matchbox 20.
Yeah.
But yeah, to myself as well to be kind, but to myself as well to be open to understanding what a high standard quality could also mean. So I
Mm.
started co-writing actually because I approached some of my clients and I said, and I don't like CCM, right? And I said to them, hey, can I write with you so I can study and understand what good CCM music sounds like? Because to me, the inherent fact that I don't like CCM means that I can't tell what good CCM sounds like and what bad CCM sounds like, because they all
Mm.
kind of sound bad to me.
Right. Right.
But it's not. That's not the case. There is good and there is bad, and I do not have the sensibilities to be able to differentiate between the two. And I mean that. I don't mean that like in a cynical way, like, oh, it's all bad anyway. I really mean that. Like, there is good and then there is bad, and I can't tell the difference because I'm not good in a genre. So I
Mm.
want to know what it is, right? So see, that's a very open hand of understanding what that standard of quality is, because I recognize that my standard of quality, especially in that genre, is not the final say. It's not objective. So I recognize that to the point where I'm like, what I think is bad might actually be good, and I need to learn that. I need to learn what that good actually is. So, with that mindset, when it comes to releasing music, my approach is that, man, I don't know what's going to hit people in a positive way. Like, what's that song that you like again from mine?
I am lost.
Yeah, I don't like it.
That's funny. That's funny. I think that's like
That
one of
is
your
one that I
best.
distinctly do not like, but
That's
at the same,
crazy. What
yeah,
don't
but
you
at
like
this,
about it? I got to know what you don't like about it.
I think the space that I was writing it in, the topic that I was writing it about, to me was not very mature, you
Mm,
know, and as I've grown older, I'm kind of like, oh man, like,
mm,
but that's not. I mean, that's not to say that it's a bad song. It's just that it fits into a different metric.
mm.
And that's also not to say that because you like the song and I don't like it, so my taste is more refined than yours. Absolutely not. I mean, I still released it because it's not bad in the sense of like it's not poorly performed, it's not poorly written, it's not it's none of that. I've just approached it with a different metric. An unfair metric if I were to use that metric to judge everybody's songs towards.
I understand that a little bit. One of the songs I was wrestling with a couple years ago. Was it 2 years ago? I released it. Perfect Imperfections. I may have sent it to you to ask you some production questions at some
Mm,
point. But long story short, I wrestled with that song for 6 months. I just like it was never exactly what I wanted it to be. And then, I have one person, actually a married couple friend of mine, who is like, this is the best thing ever. If more people heard about this, you'd be famous. I'm like, really? Like, I don't think. To me, it was like, I just released it out of discipline, kind of like what you said. Like,
yeah.
same thing with you. It's like, is it bad? No, it's not bad. Like, it's not badly produced. It's got a good melody, etc. But something about it just never felt complete, which
Right.
is so ironic, right? Because it's literally called Perfect Imperfections. And so I chose to release it that way based on listening to the title of the song. The irony is I struggled with that song more than any other song, like to
Mm.
release it.
You
So
know,
it's
yeah, but the fact that you made that song, and you're able to talk about it now, it means that that song has played its part in the development of the real product, which is you, right?
right.
And not just in terms of musicality, but in its other implications. Like you chose to be disciplined to finish a song, you chose to be disciplined to share the song, to get feedback from the song, to release that song, and all of that has developed you as that product. And now when you step out of that and you go on to whatever project you're working on now, you're better for it. And as a better songwriter, you're going to write better songs. That's the way the game
Sure.
works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that example that you gave earlier, actually, there's a similar example. It must be, I swear, it must be like one of those telephone things where it's been told enough times that it's morphed
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
its thing. But I've heard that example. It is a case study, actually, from the book Atomic Habits. I'm sure you've heard of it, by James Clear. And he gives that same example of the quantity over quality approach, but it was a photography class. And it was basically, you either do 100 pictures or you get graded on the quality of 5 pictures.
Hmm.
And so what did people do? They focused so much on the 5 pictures, and the other people were just having fun. But think of it this way also, like how many pictures did the quantity class have to choose from? They had so many to choose from, right? Whereas like the other ones didn't have a lot to choose from.
Yeah.
And so I think that's also interesting too. It's like you don't have to release everything you make.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
but you'll have a lot to choose from if you
Yeah.
finish it. So at
Yeah.
least you can release it if you want to.
Yep. I have a bunch of stuff which I don't release. And you know what? Like I think I give the impression that I finish every single one of my songs. I don't.
Mm,
I'll write and then I'll be like, you know what? This is not going direction. I like scrap
mm,
it. And I just move on to the next. So I'll be honest, you won't find me spending 6 months pining over a song.
Mm, mm-hmm. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I think there's like I listened to Phineas, the Billie Eilish's brother, talk about producing her, and like one of their songs, he's like, "Oh yeah, this took 9 months." Not because it took 9 months, like they were going at it every day, of course, but he was just like, it just like we kept coming back to it, it wasn't working, kept trying things,
Mhm.
and then other songs, like we did this in a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And they're both good, but it's just I feel like everything has a different trajectory, and I'm sure you found the same thing. I'm sure
Mhm.
not.
Yes.
I think the hard part, and maybe you can explain this to me. The hard part for me about trying to quantify discipline, like the fun part about running for me, like training for a 5K, it's so linear. Like you need to have a long run in your week, you need to have an intense run, and then you need to have a couple easy runs.
Mm.
And you just need to do that every week. And if you want to be a little faster, you increase your mileage. You might increase your workouts, your goal pace, and stuff like that. It's so input output. Whereas the frustrating thing about creativity, you cannot quantify it like that. You know, you can't say a song takes this long because it's like saying Bohemian Rhapsody and Radio Gaga or whatever, they're going to take the same amount of time. Of course, they're not going to take the same amount of time. You know, one has orchestration and all these other things, and the other one's like very simple. Or We Will Rock You. You know what I mean? Like We Will Rock You and Bohemian Rhapsody. Like, come on. One's stomping and clapping, and the other one's a whole like opera. So,
Yeah. So remember like that Venn diagram that I talked about,
mhm,
what you're able to play and what you like. We talk about developing each of those circles. The developing what you're able to play, that one is more linear. It's like running, right?
mm,
You can go on YouTube, you can get a guitar teacher or a vocal teacher, and you can learn, right?
mhm,
And the main ingredient for that is discipline.
yeah,
Sit down so many hours a day to do it. The other side, it's not a lack of discipline. It's different. It's a different kind of discipline. It's, I guess, having the discipline to give into your impulses when the guitar is in your lap. Like, do you want to start using brushes on your guitar? Or as an example, right?
mhm,
Like, just there is a certain degree of impulsiveness to developing that side of that circle, so to speak.
mhm.
Sorry, what was your question again?
Uh, Basically, how do you deal with the fact that
Right, right.
progression of music is not linear? Like if you're like, I want to finish this song. For me, I think you also just have so much more experience finishing songs that
Right,
you probably have a better idea how long it will take.
right.
But even now, I'm sure you don't always know how long it will take. So,
Yes.
so how do you deal with that unknown quantity
Right.
of?
So I remember my point now, why I started with those two Venn diagrams. But when you're doing that developing that circle with the thing that you like, right? It's essentially play. That's what you're doing. You're just playing. You're doing the thing that's fun. So when I'm writing a song, when I'm producing, I don't have a goal. I'm not looking, this song needs to be finished, right? I
Mm,
don't I don't know when it finishes. I am just having fun with the song. I am picking my VSTs. I am trying out different melodic lines, right? Like, ooh, okay, I'm gonna pick up my electric guitar now, and then I'll try this thing. What if the bass mirrors this line? That's cool. All right, Oh my goodness, like this bass had a really cool groove. I'm gonna reprogram the drums so that it follows the bass, for example, so it sounds more like an attack.
mm,
Um, and sometimes like the end product is like nothing like what I expected it to be to begin with. Like, started doing like this funk song with this collaborator, and then it ended up having a really rock chorus, and she was like, oh man, I'm not really a fan of the rock chorus. I was like, okay, what if we add like a wah wah pedal, and then so I
mm,
started using the wah. Like, all right, this feels more funky, and then okay, how about we put a disco beat here? Okay, that's
mm.
really different now, and all of this, like this whole process was just fun. I wasn't looking about where it was gonna end, but at some point it just ended. Frankly, I think it usually ends when I've done it enough where I'm bored.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's time to move on, right? I mean, like anything that you do, there's a law of diminishing returns, right?
Sure.
When you first sit down with a guitar and you lay down the guitar track from an absolutely empty session to having the guitar track, I mean, like, wow, that was a very productive 30 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever, how long it takes for you, and then you start adding stuff. Wow, okay, it's productive. But then when you get to the, to a certain stage, stuff that you add really may not change. I mean, it really may like knock the whole thing off trajectory in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
Or you start to find like, oh my goodness, like I just added like this synth pad. You can barely hear it, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make or break the song.
Right.
You know,
Right.
uh, anywhere from that point on, you can say that you're finished. You know what I mean?
Sure. 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 Yeah. You
Um,
know what's funny is
yeah.
sometimes I don't know if you've ever had this temptation, but what I really respect is people who know when to not do more. And to me that's hard. I think I can struggle with overproducing and oh everything needs to be double tracked and
Yeah.
everything needs to be really fleshed out. And I think I really respect because some of my favorite songs, it's not necessarily one of my favorite songs, but I think it took off for a reason. Louis Capaldi,
Hmm.
someone, what's it called, I can't remember.
Before you go.
That's another good one, but someone I used to love or something, I forget, the someone you loved, yeah. And it's just his voice and a piano, really. There might be some subtle synth pad in the back at the end, but that's it. Yeah, it's just his voice and piano. I'm like, to have like basically like a multi-platinum hit with 3 billion streams that has two elements is very rare, right?
Yeah.
And to me it's just like that's really gutsy to have such a stripped down. But then again, I couldn't imagine what you would add to it. So I don't know. It's just like I really respect and admire when people know when to not do more,
Right.
and
Well,
that's hard to know.
yeah. I mean, it's the same for mixing. It's funny. Like I was talking to a mix engineer that they used to work with. I
Mm,
was telling them like when I look at people's mixes, I can almost always tell their spending habits.
that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a really good point. Actually, I like
yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, it's because like mixing, maybe 25% of mixing is knowing what a compressor does, what an EQ does, what the different kinds of compressors and EQs do. You know what I mean? The differences
Hmm.
between them. And the rest, 75%, is really the choices that you make and how to use your tools, right?
Yeah.
And people always say less is more, right? When it comes to mixing, I think that's a very unfair statement,
Mm,
saying less is more, because it doesn't help the person. Like, okay, so if I do less, it'll be better. I would say yes, if you doing less is better if you don't know how to make good choices. So
mm.
making two bad choices is better than making 10 bad choices.
I think the beginner's issue is complexity is going to make it seem professional when
Mm,
actually simplicity is what professionals know how to
yes.
wield, you know.
Yeah. No, they can hear the subtle changes, so they can, I mean, like, okay, so usually when I talk about mix engineering, and I guess it's the same for production as well, is that every time you you apply something in a mix, like every time you apply the EQ, there is a cost and there is a benefit, right?
Mhm.
The benefit, if say you are cutting out the 200 range, right,
Mhm.
is that okay? It's not as muddy. You have more headroom in that area because there's a lot of buildup in that area in general. In if you have a full band, right?
Mhm.
But then there's a cost. If you pulled it out, say in a vocal, oh my goodness, it's going to start to sound have a little less body, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Um, but you do it so that it can sit better in the mix without taking up the headroom of other instruments, right?
Mm.
But there's a cost. People very rarely approach that understanding there is a cost, right?
Always, yeah.
Or people approach it not understanding whether the cost outweighs the benefit or the benefit outweighs the cost. Because if the benefit outweighs the cost, then you should pay it,
Right.
right? But then, people who are like, who don't want to spend money, so they always buy the cheapest thing, may end up, it may end up hurting them, right? Because their thing breaks, right? If in real life, it's always
Yeah.
good. There's always economy of scale. Don't get the cheapest thing just because it's cheaper. Get the thing that you actually need, right? So it's the
Mm.
same for that, and it's the same for production too, because every time you add something, there is a cost, right?
Mm.
You take up some room when you add something. It's just, is it, that, does it improve it? Does it, And for mixing, for me, I have a rule, and it's because I know myself. I know my spending habits too.
Mm.
uh, I mix for 20 minutes, and then I have to have 20 minutes off,
Mm.
right? Because I have fatigue.
Yeah.
Frankly, I think it's the same for production on the instrumental side as well. If you go at it for 6 hours, you're gonna start making bad choices.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna start adding stuff that maybe you shouldn't add, and you can't tell the difference. Did it make it better or worse?
Yeah.
So I think walking away,
You get lost.
yeah, walking
Mm.
away is very valuable.
Kind of a different question. Have you ever struggled with, I think in the church, sometimes this can be an issue. Have people ever tried to take advantage of your gifts or talents for free because of your good nature, your faith, or your friendship with them? To where it's like, oh, I expect you to kind of like produce my whole song for me just because I know you.
Yeah, not so much now, but it's also because a big part of my job with Operation Mobilization with OM as an artist mentor is to give those services for free, right?
Mm, mm-hmm.
And it isn't for free. Like, my supporters are paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in a slightly different situation. But I think the thing that I do need to articulate, regardless of whether I'm doing it for monetary reasons or not, is to make sure that the other party understands the value of which I am offering.
And how do you communicate that?
Well, I think it starts with respecting your own time. I'm not always the best at it. I mean, honestly, like, sometimes I say yes to things when I shouldn't. you know.
Mm, mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is, if you respect your time and your skills and your capabilities, people will naturally follow suit. Wherever you lay them, boundaries are important.
Mm.
Yeah. So I would say
I
that's
heard
critical.
somebody say that recently. It's kind of like people will do what you allow them to do.
Yes. Very
Mm.
true. Yeah. Especially if you have kids, you kind of you kind
Hmm.
of
Oh
you kind of
yeah.
recognize that.
I wanted to just ask you, this last year, was it a year ago? I think it was a little more recent. You were diagnosed with cancer.
Hmm. Yeah.
What was your reaction to that?
I mean, I had cancer in 2020, and I had surgery and it was done, so that
Mm-hmm.
was that was okay. And then I had a few years, 3 years so to speak, in December of 2023. Then I got diagnosed with a recurrence and had to go through chemotherapy. Um, it's a mixed bag. I'm fortunate because, like, my cancer was the prognosis was so great.
Mm.
Like, it's not the case for a lot of people, right? They
Right.
get cancer and, like, all right, like, but my prognosis was good, so I did not have to wrestle with mortality. I still had to, but not to the extent that I know other people would have
Mm.
to. However, there was also a sense of loss because, like, oh, I couldn't go back to teach at Moody. There's just no way
Mm-hmm.
I could do that. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't. My days were gonna look different.
Mm.
My schedule was gonna look different, and there was a sense of loss to that. I would say that would be my response mainly.
Yeah. And you were releasing music in the midst of that this
Yeah.
year. That must have been a lot.
So, well, a few things happened when I to my psyche, I would say, after I was diagnosed with cancer. I started noticing it when in the way I talk to certain people. I realized that, wow, I just stopped mincing my words. I was still kind. I was still gentle for the most part. Not always. I'm not necessarily the most gentle person to begin with, but I realized that I just didn't take a lot of crap from a lot of people anymore. I
Yeah.
just realized,
Yeah.
like, this conversation is not important enough for me to. And for a lot of it, it was warranted, and it was valuable to have that approach to life in general.
Yeah.
And I realized that a lot of my approach to my own music was hindered before I had this mindset. I didn't value my music as much, you know, because like my music was really a byproduct of my creativity, right? And I treated it as a byproduct. And I guess this is the flip side of the coin of treating myself as the product rather than the music, is that I was sitting on a year's worth of music. So I didn't have to produce anything to be releasing it actively, right?
Mm,
But something happened. Um, I believe it's more of a God thing than anything else, where my music was speaking to me in a way that was very apt for my situation, even though I wrote all that music before for other reasons, right?
mm.
And because of that, I held my music with a little bit more value. I was like, oh my goodness, like I need to release this, you know? So I started to be more active in releasing it. That one required discipline, more so now than ever.
Yeah.
But yes and no, it was difficult to release music because yes, it takes work to release. But it wasn't difficult to release music because I had the drive to do it, number one. And number two, new music was all already produced.
Mm.
So it's not like I had to create something from scratch and then release it. I had that going for me.
That's pretty crazy. What does a year's worth of music mean to you?
I try to release one every month. So I had 12 singles.
Wow.
Yeah, just
You had
sitting
12
there.
singles, and had you not been releasing, is that why? Or how did you have so much ready?
Yeah, I produce a lot. But yes, releasing has always been a struggle for me because that has never been, and it should be, but it's never been a part of my creative process. So that part isn't like play for me. Like the production part's like play. And as I've alluded in our early part of our conversations, I'm not a very disciplined person.
Yeah.
So things like that like fall to the wayside and yeah. So in 2023, I released like maybe a couple of singles and an EP.
So like 5 or 8 songs or something?
Yeah, maybe yeah. And they didn't do well because I release and walk away, right? You know,
Yeah. You just dropped it. You didn't
just
like
drop in, you know.
put a
And
lot into the release or the build up.
that's right. Yeah. Not a
That's
lot of
the hard part.
resources.
I get it, dude. I get it.
Yeah.
It's easier, a little bit easier for me because I don't have as much that I'm producing. So when I do actually make something, it's like easier for me to be motivated. I love making it,
Mm.
but the release part, promotion, it's just something else.
Yeah. I mean, maybe at some point we'll find joy in it. You know, I
Hmm.
think as we start to get used to the hang of it and understand the rhythm to releasing it, because now I decided to speed up my release. I'm releasing every 3 months.
Mm.
You know, this past Friday I actually released a song and I haven't posted about it yet.
Really? That's crazy.
I need to get better at it, you know, and I understand as well like getting better at it isn't necessarily just a matter of discipline, right? It's
Mm. There's
you know,
skill. There's skill involved.
there's a skill involved and I think if I take the same approach as making music, I think that would be better for everybody, you know, like
Maybe think of it a little bit more creatively
mhm.
than something that just needs to be done. I think I don't know if you've ever discovered somebody online, but I've discovered a lot of music online and I just try to reverse engineer what got me interested.
Yeah.
And I try to do that,
Yeah.
for my own stuff.
I think that's very valuable.
So like for podcasts, for instance, like obviously clips, interesting anecdotes, a cool story that happened in the podcast, like stuff like that, right? Or an unanswered question that you want to hear more about, you know?
Yeah.
So with music, it might be like a hook. It might be, I think for music to me, and I think you've already figured this out because I've seen you post videos. Video is the biggest help, I think, for music online.
Mm.
Cool
Yeah.
visuals can
Yeah.
really make someone stop and then you can capture their attention with the music. But pairing your music with good visuals, I think, is the secret weapon.
And that's a whole nother skill that I haven't necessarily developed.
I like your video. I mean, I think even I've seen you post filming yourself playing guitar in your studio, stuff like that. Like I like that stuff. I think it's
Mm.
interesting. I think the other one that you did on the beach, I think it was on the beach.
Yeah.
That one looked really cool. I love the
Yeah, that
visuals
was
there.
an initiative from one of my friends. So
Mm.
all of these, I can barely take credit. Like the stuff in my studio, that's Steph, my wife. She does that, you know.
Oh, she did that?
Yeah, she does that, and not just did, like on
Wow.
my own. I'm not really. This is the problem about me, dude. I'm all play, right? You know, I mean, like when
Yeah.
it comes when it comes to these things, obviously I have my systems to get stuff that I don't like to do done, right? You know,
Mm.
I'm not a bad worker,
You're
but when
right.
it comes to creative things and stuff like that, man, it's powerful. It's just a variable, right? You know, like
Mm.
I respond so much better to play than I do to like give me the structure. I'm gonna do this. That doesn't really work well for me, you know.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about it being all play, but then when I hear that you made like 12 songs last year, to me that would seem like a lot of work. But maybe it's just a framework that's keeping me from doing more. And then it just turns
Yeah,
into procrastination. And you don't have that mental block because to you it's not work or you don't
yeah,
think of it that way. So there's nothing to procrastinate. It's like, why would I put off having fun? You
yeah,
know?
yeah. I mean, that's really what it is. Like there are times where I'm like, okay, you know, I get absorbed in a project that isn't my own music, right? You know, because I've with my work with OM, whether it's researching for a studio in Africa or whether I'm working and organizing songwriters in my groups or stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is like a I guess a small level of discipline where like you know what, I need to set aside some time. I need to write something. I'm just gonna go sit down and write something. And
Mm-hmm.
but I think a big thing is that you're right. I've done so much of it that to sit down and write a song, it doesn't cost as much as it does to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can get like a good solid framework, almost be like done 80-70% of the song done in, if I'm fast, like maybe even half an hour, you know.
Are
So
you
that's
talking like just the writing
just the
or
writing part, just
okay.
the writing part. Yeah. Or if I'm writing something for sync, right? I can do something. I don't do that now because to me it's not really a good use of my time at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I can write and produce and mix the whole song in a day. And then I'm done. I step away
Wow.
from it. But the reason why I can do that is simply because of the amount of practice that I've had.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So, do you have any kind of encouragement to beginning songwriters, to people who either haven't written and produced that much or people who are struggling on that first part of their journey where they're just not quite there. They want to make more. Like how do you encourage somebody like that?
Yeah, I just write bad songs.
Write bad songs.
Write bad songs. I mean, with that cup example, right? Like making the cups. If you focus so hard on making the best cups, you're not developing as a potter, right? But if you're just making cups, at some point, even when you're making cups in your sleep, it's better than the other group's like best effort,
Mm,
right? And so you know you start to do that, but it's not just that too. I'm not saying like don't put your best in a song and the music that you make, but as you start to do write so many songs, right? Writing so many bad songs, and your songs stop getting bad. Then the difference between when you really try your best and when you do it in your sleep, in your flow state, some people call it, um, it's not a big difference, you know?
mm,
Yeah.
mm. This was awesome, dude. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed doing this.
Yeah. Dude, thanks for having me on your podcast. I enjoy talking about, I love talking about these things, man.